You know, one of the wonderful things about today's movie is it reminds us that we're all a little bit absolutely crazy. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, you know, this was a fun one, and we are all a bit crazy, and that's why today's film, The Madness Inside Me, was so much fun to watch. And of course, we have with us writer-director Matthew Berkowitz for the Q&A. This is an interesting psychological thriller that goes in places you genuinely do not expect, which is always fun to see. And it was an independent film. And one of the things that we're trying to do through this here podcast is to shine a light on independent films these days during the pandemic and find ways to help audiences and filmmakers connect. So I hope you check it out and consider renting it or streaming it on demand or in any of the places that you go to find movies, because The Madness Inside Me is out and could definitely use your support. We had a really good Q&A with Matthew about his creative process and what it took to get this film in the can, especially a very interesting conversation about editing, I got to say, in which there was something on one of his previous projects he did that I know you're going to enjoy hearing about, because he had an absolutely crazy idea that he executed to give himself some new ideas when he got stuck. So you'll know what I'm talking about when you hear it. But nonetheless, Matthew was very generous with his time and very forthcoming about his creative process. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop, or of course, via our iPad app, Backstory. And you know, folks, if you've never read us before, I hope you check out our free issue so you could test drive us, see what you think. And if you like it, and I hope you do, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you want to become a subscriber, you should use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. Our summer issue is the current issue, but we're working on a great fall issue for you that's going to come out in a couple of weeks here. And you know, one of the fun things we do is we always add new articles to our magazine even after we publish, because as a digital magazine, you could do that. So one of the exclusive items that we just added that was fantastic was Paul Thomas Anderson interviewing Martin Brest about directing Beverly Hills Cop and Midnight Run. And it's a really fun article because they get into very interesting and intricate conversations about what it took to make those two iconic comedy classics. So there's a lot to explore in Backstory Magazine, and it would mean a lot to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all of the Zooms of these Q&As have been going during the pandemic, support my passion project, Backstory Magazine, and become subscribers. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer-director Matthew Berkowitz about his latest film, The Madness Inside Me. It's good to see you. How's it going, man?
Good, dude. Good to see you too, man. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you. Happy to have you. So it's always good for us to start spoiler free and kind of give people a sense of who you are, where you came from. So did you go to school for this? Tell us how you got started.
I went to school. I went to Pittsburgh College. I kind of got started, who knows, at the age of like 8, 10 years old, just watching movies, loving films. Some of my like fondest memories would just be like huddled up with like my brother and my dad watching like movies for hours. And that was just my initial love for film. And then somewhere along the lines, like I wound up getting a job. A family friend of mine was like, saw me editing something for college. I wasn't really sure I wanted to go. And he said, you know, you're a pretty good editor, come work for me. So at the age 18, I started working as an assistant editor, and that was my first like groove into the film industry, you know, working in film.
What kind of stuff were you editing?
Documentaries, infomercials, everything kind of like across the board. And I really enjoyed it. You know, I have a knack for editorial. I always wanted to be a director. That was always my goal. I love the craftsmanship of filmmaking, of art in general, but I didn't really want to go to college after high school. So it was like a natural fit for me to start working in something that I loved. And then, you know, you hear a lot of things like, should you go to film school? Is film school a waste of time?
Right. Big debate, without a doubt.
So I guess I kind of didn't go to like film school. I spent some time, I went to Pitzer College and I did a double major in like philosophy and then film studies. So I was much more interested in the critical side and critical thinking of film studies, philosophy and literature. I was really just like where my passion was. And then the nuts and bolts of making a film, I mean, you learn that on set. So I was kind of like working on as many sets as I could. So when my decision came up to go to school, like Pitzer was the place I wanted to go because it was much more theoretical. Those are the things that for me, I wanted my hands as deep as possible into that.
Sure. So what's your final consensus? Did you like film school?
Not really. I like writing about movies. I like being critical about films, and I like critical thinking in terms of films. But I didn't like the production side of film school. There's a whole side of that world that I kind of was like, it's a waste of time.
Interesting. But so wasn't that the way that you got on your first sets? By making your short films in film school, or had you made short films before?
I had made short films before. My first sets were, I got out of film school. I think I graduated in 2009. So it was like the heat of like, the American Depression, everything that happened. So I was either going to get a job at which was a natural jump for me, which was in the vault at a post house at Technicolor. And I would have waited there for 10 years to go do something on my own. Basically did everything I could and bombed every interview I could do. So I didn't get the job and picked up every single side of freelance work that I could. So I shot every single thing to get myself on sets, worked in any capacity between friends, Craigslist jobs, this, that, the other.
That's cool.
And got a camera and just started trying to shoot.
What kind of camera did you get?
I got a Canon XL2 mini DV.
Nice. We're gonna talk about the cinematography later because I actually really like the cinematography in your film. Tell us about what led to your feature debut, Wild in Blue, in 2015, and how you were able to pull that off, because it's always a big deal for somebody to pull off their first film. And then what was your biggest lesson making that? Once again, I was just getting myself on film sets, everything I could do. It was funny, actually. I was like kind of in a place in my life where I just needed to be on sets. I didn't care if I was getting paid or whatever. And I had a buddy come to me and say, hey, will you direct this music video for me? So I just needed to get out of my head. So I was on the set. Music video just was not working. Nobody was vibing. And there was like a PA, a kid, Felix. He was like the associate producer / PA. I'm sorry, that's an amazing title. Associate producer / PA. You don't hear that one too often. It was just that type of music video. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Nobody gelled. And I think I did like 2 days on shoot and kind of quit / just didn't work out anymore mutually. And fast forward 3 months, and I was begging the guy who's paying for it, please don't do that. Like, don't spend your money on that. Like, spend your money here, or don't do that. It's not going to show up on screen. And fast forward, 3 months later, I got a call from Felix. He said, I had saved some money and I want to make a movie, and I really enjoyed working with you and your passion on the music video. Let's sit down. So what was like a shoestring budget became a little bit more money, but it's still a super, super string budget. And we kind of sat down, started throwing around ideas. I was really, really, really into like Haneke at that time, Man Bites Dog, really into I love Man Bites Dog. If there's anybody listening that's never seen Man Bites Dog, which is a great mockumentary, please see Man Bites Dog. Yeah, it's a great film. And this was also like 2012, 13. And it was like kind of at the height of like where Korean cinema was coming, right? And it was like Kim Ki-duk was making these incredible films. So I was like really obsessed with, and I've always been a fan of like Godard and Bergman and some of this like meta cinema. And we sat down and came up with this idea. And given my philosophical background, like what is a film? How do we like really adventure into a movie? Well, let's make something genre that also has a theoretical approach, and came out with Wild and Blue.
what if a serial killer made his own movie? And then we could talk about some of these ideas about cinema, life recreating art, art recreating life, film as like a product. And
well, so what was your budget and schedule for that?
The budget was extremely low.
Okay.
It was $100,000.
Okay, great.
Schedule was, I think, 16 days, if that.
And what was your biggest lesson on that, your feature?
Just adjust. Go with it. Go with it every step of the way. Everything you can learn. So I was in post, and I had hit like my mentor. His name's Robert Freddy. He cut tons of films. Die Hard, Tango and Cash, Rocky, and he helped produce that film for me, Wild and Blue. And we looked at it, and I had great scenes. Just like my scenes were awesome, phenomenal. I loved my moments, but the story, like as a whole, wasn't like making much sense. I mean, it made sense, but it wasn't like it didn't. I mean, and granted, like I'm not always the biggest fan of traditional 3-act structures, but the film had a problem, and it just wasn't like carrying the entire movie. And then I get really intense about certain things. So I took everything off my walls in my apartment. I printed a still, like old school film editor, right? Still from every scene. And then I just painted, like pinpointed all the stills all over my wall. And I just reshuffled things everywhere. And I went through like 7 different re-edits of the movie.
That's cool. So you kind of like had like an analog moment where you just needed to see it kind of the way that screenwriters look at index cards on the board and stuff like that.
I'm a big fan of that. So I did that with the analog, move things around, put this here, put a note card here, put a sticky here, write a note. What if you use this line from here, voice over here? I went through 7 or 8 edits and we're scratching our heads. And I was like, you know what, this film is, I'm too involved in the making of this movie as the director, because I'm getting ahead of the edit. So we said, okay, cool. We want something random, and through the randomness will come something we haven't expected. Right. So we took all these like printed images, all these different scenes off the walls, threw it into a trash bag, called it the trash bag edit.
Really?
And swear to God. And we pulled, the 3 of us, me, Felix, and Bobby, sat around, and we said, look, here's the rules. Whatever comes out of the trash bag, you got to cut. You got to cut it into a movie. If it doesn't make any sense, who cares? Cut it and see it. So I pulled first scene, handed it to Bobby. He put it up on the wall. Second scene, handed it to Bobby, put it up on the wall. Third scene, handed it to Bobby, put up, 78, 80 scenes. My wall is now covered in new index cards and images, and starts to like open my mind to a new way the movie can be seen, something I had never conceptualized. And the rule between the 3 of us was no matter what the trash bag said, you got to cut it, right? It's like a little bit of chaos into the craft. And through that, I learned a ton. Some of that stuff wound up in the film and really opened my eyes to something that I could have never imagined come out of a movie, come out of my film. And it really actually helped me in the structure of the movie moving forward.
I've never heard of doing that before. I think that's wild. And it sounds like just like a fun exercise to get out of your skin and then obviously return to your main cut, because as a digital cut, you could do that. So that's a cool story. I'd never heard that.
Yeah, it was a cool learning lesson.
I want to get to today's movie, but before I do, we got to talk about 2017, A Violent Man, your second feature.
Yeah.
So here we have a setup that is similar in ways to today's movie. And just tell us briefly, what was your biggest lesson and budget and schedule on A Violent Man?
Budget super low again. We did a movie maker article about it. It was like $300K. It was like insane. But we shot like every scene ahead of time, and I just reshot. Like we would do fight rehearsals, and I just shoot on my iPhone and edit it together at home, and really just have I was doing fight sequences that were taking me like what would be a week. I would do it, or 4 days, I would do it a day. So it was just really getting ahead of my shot lists and
So
having
you were shooting your rehearsals essentially, and that was the way to figure out your shot list, figure out what you needed, and then do it better on set. Okay, that makes sense.
It's a cool movie. I'm really, it was also very unexpected. That was a film that started just through, it was something that I had come up with a couple years prior. It was like very influenced by Nicholas Ray's In a Lonely Place. I always wanted to kind of contemporize that because I thought, that's a masterpiece to me. It's a great story about heartbreak. It's really a character study wrapped inside of noir. And I had that script, and I was pitching another film because Out of Wild and Blue, everybody said, you got to make something super commercial now. So I was pitching another movie, and everybody just jumped onto A Violent Man, and I'm glad they did because it came out great. And through that, I met somebody who became very close to me in my life, which is Thomas Jones, great actor, who's also in today's movie. And my lesson with that film probably would just be like embrace the unexpected. It was something that like I had been pushing, and it happened very quickly. I mean, we put that together in like 4 months. It was a pretty radical, fast-paced movie, a lot of production value. So I'm really proud of it, and I got to like really shape the world. I wanted to tell a drama inside of a genre film, and I wanted to accomplish that.
That's cool.
I think I did. Yeah.
All right. Well, getting to today's film, The Madness Inside Me. We're still in the non-spoiler section, but you could tell us what you want. When did that idea start percolating, and when did you start writing it?
That was like the first script I percolated, right? I graduated film school. I made a radical short film that like almost got me kicked out of school. And
wait, why did it almost get you kicked out of school?
So when you're in your thesis, right, you have to like present concept to your board of directors, right? And so it's 4 or 5 teachers that tell you whatever, if you can make the movie. So I presented an idea to them, and they said, this is so out there, it's noir and Lynchian in ways. And they said, you can't make it. You're biting off too much you can chew, you're going to fail. I said, well, that's not fair. You can't tell me I'm going to fail. So I kind of told them I was making a different movie, and you have to show everybody progress throughout the year. And I wound up making this like very violent, but like emotional movie. And it kind of was like, and I just showed it. And, nobody checked the tape the day of the screening. So they just thought I was making this other romance film, and nobody really asked. And I shot fake scenes throughout the year.
Oh, that's great.
And I showed people, and I got criticism, and lo and behold, the day you're supposed to, 300 people, the entire senior class sits in the auditorium, and up comes my movie. And it's like, whoa, it's just very intense. It's like really in that Wild and Blue world, like hardcore underground, like early Takashi Miike, like just dirty film. And so I thought I was going to get kicked out for that. Turns out that like I didn't, and got a lot of great reviews, and the teachers loved it because I just pushed some boundaries. And it was kind of like that got me, involved with, I had a friend who said, let me send this to this manager I know. And he represented some like very big people that are people that are really established. And I was 24, 25. And my first concept that I pitched to him was an early derivative of The Madness Inside Me. And it was a Lolita-esque story where it was a younger girl at the age of 21 who had this traumatic experience happen to her as a child. And then fast forward 8 to 10 years later, and she now comes face to face with a man who has affected her psychology, and she has this PTSD. She begins this sordid romance with this older criminal, and she comes from a very bourgeois lifestyle, and he comes from the antithesis. And it's this concept about rebellion against who you are and your identity. And then a lot of the other stuff was wrapped up in the film. And so I wrote it when and it's always about like this thrill seeking behavior, the identifying with the criminal type of idea. Anyway, movie never got made, got shelved. I don't even know what happened. Wound up making Wild and Blue, A Violent Man. So that was the early variation of it. And then legitimately, I had made A Violent Man, and it was 2018. Violent Man hadn't come out. And I was having breakfast with an actress, well-known, like Cronenberg film. She's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman, and a very dear friend of mine. And we were having breakfast together. And she said that she, we've been wanting to work together. And she said that nobody was making these edgy type of roles for a woman in her age bracket, right? Which is that like early 50s, late 40s area. And I'm a big fan of opening these brackets up to the world. They shouldn't be so contained as it has been in the past. I don't think it's quite fair, right? So, and at that lunch, it hit me. I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "I got to rewrite this script for her. It's amazing." Like I'd wanted, and ironically, I always thought she was an amazing actress. I'd always wanted to work with her. So I rewrote it, reshaped the entire thing. Was also like kind of like inspired once again by like Piano Teacher, and that's how that came to be. So it came to fruition through just a conversation, trying to just put together a project with an amazing actress that I'd always want to work with. And then it sparked this idea in me, how I could really like contemporize something that had been left on the floor.
Did she end up in the movie?
No. So I wrote this script with her in mind for 4 months, really developed it with her. I was, I grew up in LA. So I was living in LA at the time. I now live in New York for a lot of reasons. And I was having breakfast with my dad. And suddenly I get this text from her, "Matt," and I'm flying that day or the next day. My wife and I were flying to New York to prep, right? And the whole thing needed to be shot in New York. It was like a whole thing because it's just better for the story. And I get this text from the actress, and she's saying, "You're not going to believe it. I've come down with pneumonia. I don't know what to do. I can't fly out in 2 weeks." And I was like, "Okay, it's fine. You don't need to be out in New York in 2 weeks. Let's just stay in touch. You might be able to beat it. Might be a cold." Flew out to New York. Wasn't the cold. Wasn't pneumonia. She didn't get any better. And so she and I both mutually thought it was not fair to just string a lunch. So we both thought it was important for me to recast it.
Okay.
And I did. And through that, I met the amazing Maren Dungy, who did an phenomenally excellent job with the role and really made it her own.
And what year was this shot?
This was shot in August of 2019.
Cool. Going back for 1 second, one thing I rarely interject personal stuff, but your story reminded me of a film school experience I had in which, just like the intro, like when you're making your first short films, it was not a thesis. Most students are doing I locked my car keys in the car. How am I going to get into the car? Or I'm locked out of my apartment, and just using their friends. I got this crazy idea to start casting actual actors and finding people in the real world using like the casting office at film school. And I did a movie that involved an assassin, and he at one point ends up in a dungeon with a real dominatrix that we found. And my teachers were so offended, I got sent to the dean's office, literally in college, like literally sent to the dean's office, and I was banned from speaking in class. And I'm telling you, there was no nudity in this film. There was no sex in this film, but there was a lot of violence because this was an assassin and he was acting out these things. And it was pretty tame by most standards, but it was like the craziest thing. It's like, dude, we're adults. We're in school. I'm trying to push some boundaries. You're saying I can't speak because part of the class was you always have to be able to defend your film to the class and answer questions. And, finally they were like, okay, go back to class. We'll tell the teachers to let you speak. So I respect your move of actually putting in the extra effort to shoot fake scenes to show your thesis staff because I've been there and lived that. Well, so, okay. When we always talk about writing habit, in this here podcast. And so how important is outlining to your process when you sit down to write?
It's very unimportant.
Okay.
I mean,
everybody does it differently. What? So why you've never been interested in outlining?
No, I've tried, and I do. I mean, look, it's hard because I do outline a lot, but I hit a point when I'm like maybe 50% through my outline where I feel like, okay, if I go any further, there's not going to be room for me to be creative. So I like doing like a rough beat sheet, very like, okay, cool, 24 pages. Let's start the turn, 31 pages. Let's move into here are some of the actions that should happen. Some scripts, it's pretty specific. Madness inside me was like, a lot of it came down to, now granted, the script from beginning, middle, and end is like an 80 to 90% rewrite from what it was 10 years before. Relationships, everything is tremendously different. But my writing habit is like, I like to just set like 4 or 5 hours apart. Just sit there and write.
Page count versus time spent writing. So you like 4 or 5 hours a day?
Yeah, 4 or 5 hours a day. If I can hit a page count that's 3 to 5 pages, I feel really good about it. But some days you can, I can write 10, 6 of them suck, and I normally make a playlist, and I'll just listen to this playlist on loop through the entire writing process. So it's like 10 songs, or sometimes it's just one song I'll listen on loop for the entire day.
Just so you know, I just want to point this out. I think that's a cool idea, and I've interviewed some writers before. And they say that continuing to listen to the same playlist when writing brings them into the moment and the concept for that particular project. So sometimes it's a certain album or something like that. So I see it as a sense memory exercise of sorts. So that is an interesting idea. And I'll tell you who does that, who told me once who does that was Christopher Nolan, was talking about doing that very specifically on Inception when I interviewed him. And I think he was a little unconscious about why he was doing that. So we talked about like getting back into that moment, getting back into that I'm writing now type of feeling. So, it's a common thing. It doesn't work for everybody. And, there's obviously no one way to do anything. So that's what's so fun about these interviews. But just wanted to point out that is an interesting technique to use the same music on a particular script over and over again.
It is that temporal memory thing that triggers like I'm writing. It's also sometimes for me like, if I'm writing a romantic scene or a sentimental scene, I'll have a type of song that goes along for that tone. But if I'm writing just something that's like very pulsating, threatening, I might need a different song that gives me the tone and gets me into the rhythm of writing in that language.
Sure.
So it might just be a totally different genre of music, but I try to hit my 3 to 5 page count. Sometimes I'll just lay on the couch and stare at the ceiling for hours. Sometimes I'll be laying in bed in the middle of the night and I'll get up and I'll write for a couple hours. And I know that like giving myself the room to know that like sometimes what I'm going to write is just crap. And then sometimes what I'm going to write is awesome. Or I'll write a scene just out of context. I know I want to see this. I don't know what it is, something visual. I've always wanted to see this visually. So there's plenty of scenes and Madison's Past didn't even make it in the shooting script, but they were just these visceral scenes and that I wanted to see. Maybe it started with an image or something like that I felt was reminiscent of just the general story, and it just might not have ever made it in, and scenes are sitting on the floor. So that's kind of where my writing process goes. It's sticking with the beats and then flushing out, like having fun as much as I can.
And what do you do if you get writer's block? How do you handle it briefly if you get it?
If I get writer's block, I try to move locations. Like if I write at home, I'll get up, grab my laptop and go to a coffee shop. So I try to get out of my physical space, because I sometimes think like physical space for me keeps me in the same mentality of it, or I'll go for a walk and then try to come back and hit it again.
That's a good idea. That's what a lot of writers do, and get the blood flowing is important. So obviously there's a time when a writer is getting a script around to friends, investors, etc., and you're getting notes. And
Yeah.
notes could be tricky territory to travel because everybody has an opinion, and you have to know how to collate it without taking it too personal to the point that you're stalling yourself as an artist as well. Was there anything you want to tell us about the notes phase on the Madness Inside Me? As you're also possibly going out to investors or whatever as well. And obviously, we're still in the non-spoiler section, so we could table something if you want to save it as important for later. But really, just about taking notes.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because the script was optioned before I made it. And it was optioned by a company that wanted to make it on a very different, bigger size of a film with much bigger sense of talent. And it didn't get made for a couple reasons, but it got close a couple times and then just didn't. So what's interesting about that is my first draft of the script was extremely as far I sometimes try to have my scripts go, if the volume measurement stopped at 10, I try to get it to go to 11 or 12 of intensity. So then when I started shopping it around in this finance company, some pretty well-known producers took it on, we had to dial that down. And through dialing it down, sometimes you get resistant to the notes because they're against the vision, but there's value in a lot of notes. As a writer, you kind of have to explore a lot. And for me is like, I got to just take a beat, wait a day and look at those notes. But looking back now, those notes were really valuable because the movie wound up somewhere. The final version, the final script, was influenced by finding a middle ground, shaping it between this high volume, very intense script and this commercial version of it. And I was able to incorporate certain characteristics of it. So notes open your eyes because as a writer, I don't think I'm the only person, but it's easy to have tunnel vision and only see what's on the page and just stick to that vision. And I think that notes are able to bring you out of it. At least for me, they're very helpful.
Well, that's cool that you were open to it and that you were able to kind of reassess it at a different budget level and still, make the film. What was the budget and schedule?
The Inside Me was not a lot, but it was a lot more than other films that I've made. And it was 18 days, which is crazy, all in New York. And it was predominantly night shoots.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that because, good God, man, the low light cameras you were using looked so great at night. I mean, really great. I mean, it's just kind of incredible that we're living in this time where you have cameras like that, where you could be on a street and just see so far down the street into the distance. And I don't know. I really like the photography. I guess the only other question before we get out of this into the spoilers is, was there anything that you did interesting on this film as a director to prepare? Did you have rehearsals before you started shooting? Were you able to get your shot list done? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm a really technically oriented director. So I had my shot lists done for all three versions of this movie: the super hardcore version, the high-end commercial version, and the one that got shot. So
great.
I do everything I can to prepare because by the time you get on set, I like to sometimes you kind of throw it away and see what's there, what your actors are bringing to it. On this film, because of the tight recast, I wasn't able to rehearse with Mary. What I was able to do was just talk really conceptually and theoretically about her background and the story's background and the character. So I could talk theoretically about the world, which was a very fun experiment for me because because just due to time and sensitivity, she was in Los Angeles and I was already prepping in New York, so it would have been impossible for us to rehearse. And that was an interesting way to work with your actor, because I think it actually gave a lot of room for both of us to see a new picture of a film emerge from it.
And that makes sense. Well, so podcast listeners, if you have not yet seen The Madness Inside Me, go watch it. You could see it on VOD. You could rent it, because we are going to get into the spoilers now. And I hope during this time you are supporting independent films. So definitely go see this. And we're going to get into the spoilers. So you have been warned. Here's what I like. You could read a synopsis of this film. It doesn't mean anything. Like it goes in directions one does not expect. Essentially you have a film noir setup of a late night break-in and a husband being murdered and the wife being, kind of knocked out. And when they finally find the killer, she decides to let him go. And she recants that, it's not the person she identified in the lineup because she wants to get revenge. So, okay, that's a good film noir setup. But we quickly delve into different territory in which, in her quest to understand the murderer, she learns that it was more or less an accidental death because the guy was just a peeping Tom that loves to go into other people's apartments, inhabit their spaces. And he was busted in the middle of the night and he fought back and won. And okay, that's still an interesting twist, but it gets really fascinating when we learn that our protagonist, Madison, had that in her past as well. This concept of breaking into people's spaces as an escape from her own, sleeping in their beds a little when they were out of their apartments, wearing their clothes, she says. So there's a lot going on in this movie, and it keeps going from there, which we'll get to. When did you kind of get the idea of that development in which, yeah, she's going to let him go to get her own revenge, but then she realizes she's like him and kind of obsesses about him and starts this very, strange, chaotic, dark relationship with her intruder?
I've always kind of been fascinated by this idea. I identify a lot with these type of characters that are in my script that are kind of like the outsider looking in, like the Travis Bickles of the world. So I've always been I identify with these people that don't traditionally fit into the mold, the social mold. And I like plots where an event pulls us out of our social molds or makes us rethink of who we are and how we got there. And for Madison, that really touches base because this event kind of makes her really question, has she always been the person that she is to this day, or has she just been trying to understand herself through trying to understand criminals? Is she been pretending to be another person her whole life? And then it starts to kind of deal with, being in one space, who we present ourselves to the outside world versus who we reserve ourselves to be, the toying with senses of self and our own layers of identity. And in a way, I tried to really draw a comparison between, the layers of psychology, right? Is you have a psychologist who sits and talks to somebody and tries to get to know them versus a voyeur who goes into somebody's space and tries to understand them through their things, who they are, what they are. And that version is Frances. So it's Frances and Madison. I wanted to really make a connection between this pathology of psychology. And that's kind of where I wanted to fuse their bond.
And it's interesting because, some people would see Frances as the antagonist, right? The guy that broke in, killed her husband. But, Madison is an anti-hero of a character in herself because as she starts spiraling down a bit chaotically, she's making the lives of friends and family around her quite worse. I'm not sure that they really deserve it. Actually, I'm sure they didn't deserve it. But it was part of her grief process. So how did you find that balance of Madison in which, we think of her as the hurt wife that wants revenge, but then we see her doing very, self-destructive and strange things where she's becoming an antagonist to the people around her.
Something that also you should know is my mother's a psychologist. So I grew up hearing these stories of people who had a traumatic life event and never were able to rebound from it. And we all deal with grief. I don't think that there's just a straightforward path of how to deal with grief, any of us. So I kind of wanted to take that concept and push it to the limits of like one whose life was destroyed by another, Madison, whose life was destroyed by Francis. And then she pursues to just blow up her life because it just will no longer look and feel the way that it did before. And the kind of like bourgeois world that she existed in ceases to exist. She no longer will fit in. And she's trying to break out of that mold for herself.
What were the challenges of developing the relationship with her and Francis? It's one thing to stalk and kill your husband's killer, but it's another thing to kind of obsess and fall for him. So that was an interesting relationship as well, in which I could see like the character maybe trying to fool him that she's slightly interested, but she goes above and beyond.
Look, I think that I wanted to play with the relationships of power and psychology. It is a series of mind games between the two. And in a lot of ways, she was trying to understand her own grief through understanding Francis. It was like that whole self-therapy that people can give themselves. So as Madison is trying to like get to know Francis, there's an interesting condition called the madness of two, where there's been these events where, twins or people who are close to each other, one person has a psychotic break and the other person gets affected by it, even though they have no direct psychological connection.
And that happens in real life? Because it seems like a thing that you see mostly in movies.
No, it's a real thing. It's a French theory, and it's happened. It's crazy stories of it. And the original title for this film was Madness of Two. We changed The Madness Inside Me. But it is, taking these two people who have more in common with one another than they look on the surface. Two people came from very different worlds, very different upbringings.
Right.
And that actually happen to have more in common with one another than they would have thought. And they do both have this sense of arousal for risk-taking behavior, trying to get to know others and identifying with other people.
Well, it's interesting because, you could have just left that as once she realizes no one really wanted to kill her husband, it was just like, because the intruder was caught and it was a mistake that she wanted to then understand him. So she learns this lifestyle. You don't do that, in which you actually reveal that Madison says that was part of her past and that she used to do that, which is wild that it's rekindling this old part of her past. At what point did you realize that was going to be a part of her past in which she was one of these voyeurs as well? And by the way, public service announcement, folks, just get an alarm, because, a lot of these people just sneaking in through windows and, getting into some of these apartments so easily would be thwarted by an alarm. And I am a proud owner of a nice alarm system, so get an alarm. That's all I was thinking about the whole time. But sorry, that was a diverging path. Getting back to it, when did you decide that Madison had that in her past?
That was a later draft in the script. I'm a big fan of writing scripts without as much dialogue as I can. And there are definitely sequences in this film that just pages without dialogue. But there was something, and it was interesting about that sequence that's on the roof that you're talking about, where she explains her past and how she has this idea. It's a whole story, which I'll get to. But in short, that was one of the last drafts that just wasn't tracking for people. For me, it would have tracked, but people were like, we need to know. And, people threw out ideas. Oh, maybe she's rebelling. Her husband was cheating on her. Oh, give us more of her life before the event. And that wasn't relevant to me. So it was that was something that happened later on in the draft. And it wasn't, people wanted, at least the readers wanted the explanation. And I'm glad we got that. And it was also one of those things that through editorial, what's funny is some of the producers wanted me to take that scene out. They thought that it would be
That's
best.
interesting. It was too much exposition.
It was too much exposition. So I had fought not to put that in the script. And then I fought to keep it in the cut.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It works. It shows enough into her. And, to your credit, one of the things that you do is rather than have things be premeditated, you kind of just let us go with the protagonist and see what kind of trouble she's getting into, which is, submersive. I really liked it, in which, you don't know what she's doing. Her husband's, been killed. She's definitely grieving. But one night she goes out to a club and she's just getting drunk. She's letting a guy pick up on her. She's having fun. And then she starts walking home and somebody's following her. And it kind of, you think, oh, maybe it's the guy from the club. And then she's running from him and you're like, oh, this is the thriller. What's happening next? Right. And she gets home and the guy breaks in and is wearing a hood and is, sexually assaulting her and starts taking the hood off. And she's like, no, keep it on. And then you realize, oh my God, she set up this whole thing and you didn't see the premeditated part of it. And I like that because it's a story that keeps you guessing. And so, again, to your credit, you have her literally walking down the street after having an annoying dinner with her sister-in-law, Cynthia. And she just sees some pretty girl coming back from a club on her phone. And she just stops in her tracks and turns around and starts following the girl. And there's, I think that's probably your longest point in the script with no dialogue, in which, she stalks this girl and gets into her apartment. And, we later, you keeping that scene on the roof at least gives the audience a sense of she's done this before. So she's not an amateur breaking in. We don't see her actually break in, but there's just a great sequence in the girl's apartment when the girl comes back and the camera's just floating through and you just have a really well-designed shot in which the camera goes all the way from the girl's living room where she's standing into a bedroom or office. And you just see behind the door, Madison's hiding there. And then just, runs out and takes a picture because she's like taking pictures on film, developing them. And so that was an interesting sequence. Tell us about how that came about, because it was another one of those points that things are getting really twisty. You're not sure where it's going. You're seeing her talk the talk that she's interested and has this past, but then you're seeing her actually do it, which I thought was, important to show.
Thank you. Thank you for the compliments. It means a lot. With this character, particularly, like she's in ways, she's impulsive. We don't always know exactly what's running through this character's head. And I think that was what keeps it interesting. And it's a fun balance between like letting your audience be completely caught up with your main character and letting them fall too far behind where you lose them.
Right.
So in the writing, particularly in the directing, it was trying to find that balance where I'm continuously letting the audience catch up and become engaged, and then letting my character drift a little bit far and then having them catch up. And I wanted it to be like that scene in particular, I wanted it to be like a very sensual, floating, voyeuristic camera, just in the same way that Madison's mind is floating through this person's apartment. So the camera has that personality, and I wanted the personality of the camera, just like the aspect ratio, which is a different story, but to really be reminiscent of Madison's mental state. That's how that whole scene just became so much of a fluid dancing movement between the living room to the bedroom to the camera, laying down in the bed. And that was a fun scene to shoot. That whole sequence was.
How many cameras did you have for your shoot? And what did you shoot on?
We had one, the red helium.
Some of your shot compositions were great. I actually loved the shot earlier on in the movie where the camera's inside the hearse and they're walking behind it. I thought of it as a way to do a funeral scene on a budget. You didn't have to go to a cemetery and do all that. You get what's going on. So I thought that was like a good example of inventing a unique shot, but telling us exactly what's going on and why we need it.
Thank you.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You know, if you've never read us before, you could test drive us. You could check out our free issue. And if you dig what you see and you want to subscribe, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And there's a lot to explore. And, you know, even after we publish an issue, like for instance, our summer issue, we still add new cool articles. So we recently added a great Q&A that happened here in Los Angeles between Paul Thomas Anderson and director Martin Brest about making Beverly Hills Cop and Midnight Run. And they really got into the weeds on talking about these two iconic 80s comedies and what it took to make them, and especially the challenges that Martin Brest went through on each of them and how he handled them. And it was a great chat. And it's a great article. You could check out an excerpt of it actually for free on our website, backstory.net, on our blog. And then, of course, subscribers get to read the entire piece. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where I've been putting all these Zoomcasts during the pandemic, support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber to Backstory Magazine. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with writer-director Matthew Berkowitz about his latest film, The Madness Inside Me. So tell us about, you know, obviously you're the director, you're also the writer, and there's times sometimes during production where you need to rewrite something. Was there a time where you needed to do a rewrite during production on this film?
There was, and it was the ending.
We'll get to the ending in a second.
Cool.
I want to go slightly in linear order here. The one question I forgot to ask is, you know, Madison's job is interesting. She's a prison advocate trying to help people get off on parole. Do you think that's because she knows that if she had ever been caught earlier in life, that she would have ended up as one of those people possibly in prison from sneaking into people's house? Or what do you think led her to that job? Because she definitely has a passion for it as well. But as we see, especially by the end of the movie, she's clearly out there taking the law into her own hands when she deems necessary.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a piece of her personality. I think that she empathizes with these people because she understands them. Because given a different set of circumstances, she might be sitting where they are. I mean, she is a character who found a love for psychology and therefore didn't do something to wind herself up in jail. So short answer, yeah.
Let's get into editing for a second. You had told me right before we started that you're a podcast listener, which I think is great. So that means you're the 28th or so podcast listener over the years that's gone from being a passive listener to in the series. Well, so you know this question, the lessons of editing, because it's the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about your film in the editing room? And, you know, now I have to ask, did you end up doing a trash bag edit at all for this movie?
What did I learn? What I learned was mostly in sound, actually, on this film, in the edit room. I had designed this script. I've worked with these two same sound editing teams on all my films, Marcello Dubas and Jason Brennan. And they will talk and conceptually break down how I'm a big fan of sound design and painting the world. And Marcello was involved in numerous rewrites of the script because I wasn't going to have any music. I just wanted to do No Country for Old Men. Just have all diegetic sound and use the city of New York to tell us the story of Madison's mental decline. So my first edit of the film was that, and it was super cool. I mean, the producers all watched it and they were like, this is awesome, great, love it. I got some really great comments. Honestly, I put a pin in it and I was like, okay, people kind of came back to me and they were like, dude, you nailed it on the first cut. And I wasn't really happy with it. And I kept going and going. And then I started to lay in music to kind of tell this hypnotic side of Madison's mind, this wandering side, the question, and I brought in a composer friend of mine, or a composer who became a friend of mine, Peter Adams. And he wrote some stuff, like beautiful stuff for the movie. And I think that's what really elevated the edit, was using something to edit to, which I've always my dream. I love, like, I love music. I love rhythm. Editing is just rhythmatic. It's just music. It's the image of music. But that really helped me tell from a screenwriter standpoint during editing. I was able to tell more about my characters through some of the moments of music than I was able to tell through some of the moments of silence. So that was a big lesson I learned, because going into it, once again, the movie changed shapes. I really was like dead set on, I even told Peter, dude, I can't hire you in this movie because I'm not going to have new music. Turns out, hired him, changed the film in a lot of ways. And it gave me like a very nice way of just going back from the beginning, just recutting the entire film.
One of the things that I'm curious about, is you use flashback structure of the home invasion, right?
Yes.
The scene where her husband's dying, and you keep showing us a little more and more of it each time. Was that totally scripted like that, or was that something that you discovered in editorial?
That was something I discovered completely in editorial. In the script, it was, you saw everything right out the gate. It was like minute 9, you saw her husband get beat with a pipe, her slammed into the wall, punched and knocked out, and woke up covered in blood. That was always in the script. When I was watching it, I also was like, I kind of want to unravel her memory over the film. And I started toying with it, and it worked. And I really liked what I was able to hide and show the audience at the same time.
I think it worked great. And one of the things that you did to really play with the audience was, once you established the flashback structure of her going to the bathroom, which is where her husband is being beaten, and, she ends up getting knocked out too, is, one night in the middle of the night, she thinks she hears something, she gets up, she goes to the bathroom, and you think it's going to be like, oh, more of the flashback, right? And because she's like trepidatious outside the bathroom, and she slowly opens the door, and then she turns on the light, and it's just, she's going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Like nobody's there. Yeah. And it's like you're going against the structure of more being revealed each time. So transitions like that were really great too. But let's talk about that ending now. This could have ended a lot of ways. Talk us through kind of the old ending from the early script idea, and how you got here, and how that changed along the way, as you were going to say. So you could even go back to the original concept of the actress that didn't end up in it if you want.
So the original ending of the film was, and it literally went up until the day we were shooting, and that's when I rewrote it. So we shot on a real prison, a live prison in Queens. So my wife, Samantha Watkins, who also plays the inmate at the end of the film, she got us a real prison, because they said, Matt, where do you want to shoot? And me being me said, prison, I want to shoot in the prisons. Get me some prisoners. So we were shooting, like, it was a 10-page day, and we shot all of Eddie's scenes that day. And then the original ending of the film, where the tables were turned. Madison, in the original draft of the script, was a white blonde woman who comes face to face with a younger white blonde version of herself. And Madison, now in jail, talks about how madness can be contagious, and that it's easy for a psychologist to sit back and judge. This is just the shorthand version of it. Easy for a psychologist to sit back and judge. But at any point, something could happen, and that person could get swept up into madness. Now, for a lot of reasons, that just wasn't playing anymore when I brought Marin in. The movie kind of took a bigger shape, different shape, and the relationships between the characters changed. I wanted to end kind of on a higher note, which is like, going to end this movie on a high note. Would be this.
That warm and fuzzy feeling for the madness inside me.
Yeah. So I said, okay, let me take this character and let me give her a way to, how would I let this character reintroduce herself back into the world? How would I give her a grasp on her own life and empower her? And honestly, during our lunch break shooting at the prison, I grabbed Maren and I said, hey, this actually wasn't even my idea. It was my wife's idea. She wanted me to switch it. She said, just think about it. She'd been telling me for a couple of days, like, just think about it, just think about it. When you're shooting a movie, you can't really think about it until the day you got to think about it. And I was at the prison, we were shooting, I thought about it. I said, you're right, I got to switch this. So we went to Maren. She said, great, I love that idea, so much better. And I was like, really awesome. Let's sit down and write it. So I grabbed like the call sheet, turned it over, grabbed a pen, and we sat there, rewrote the scene.
So you're essentially just rewriting the final speech.
Yeah, the final speech. Yeah, it was in the same setup, same walk, same camera moves, everything. Yeah. But it was just the monologue. And to Maren's credit, she memorized that final speech. I think she had like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's great.
But it was the right call. Like everybody, all the producers, everybody was on set. Once they heard it, we're like, right call. Let's use this scene.
Well, leading up to that, though, you have this interesting dynamic in which they're sneaking into Cynthia, the sister, in-law's apartment. And, she'd been a little annoying, but she wasn't bad at all. But that was the final place that Francis and Madison go together. And, there was some pre-planning because she's upstairs, she's looking around, and you hear a gunshot below. And then Francis says, just remember what we said, walk out of here. And so, it's interesting because I like that there was that pre-planning done off camera. We don't see it, so it's a surprise. But I mean, they kill the brother-in-law, and I don't know if Cynthia's outside parking the car because they're coming back from being at dinner or something like that. But she's gone for a while, and then she comes in to discover the body. I guess putting her in the same situation that Madison was put in which she's a grieving wife now. Was there ever plans to kill them both, or was there ever plans to have them fight back? It's good that Madison turns the tables on Francis and kills him because that's, the film noir setup that you were kind of going for all along. But I'm just curious about the variants that could have played out in that finale and how you arrived at what you arrived at.
In the original script, it was always the person who died was always James, Cynthia's husband. Cynthia wasn't there. It was pretty much always like that.
So it was never Cynthia because she's the one who Madison is directing most of her anger at. I guess killing her husband would be a revenge in of itself.
Yeah, it was kind of like something came back full circle to Cynthia, and it was always like that. The way it happened was very different, and like it was in that level 11 version of the script. There was mutilation stuff. It was crazy, but that got taken out. It was actually like a wonderful note from when I was brainstorming with the original actress who was attached. She was like, Matt, your crescendos are so big. She's like, you always have these crescendos. She's like, I think that if you lower the crescendo will be bigger if it's lower. So I had this big sequence where, her and Francis, where she helped Francis dispose of his body. And then I don't know, just like, what does that do? I don't know. I thought it was much more interesting that she kind of put herself into the position of a criminal and she stood above this dead body and watched him die. Now, in the original script, not the original script, the shooting script, she points the gun at James and holds it. And you as the audience, you're not only watching your main character watch an innocent man die, which is dark, but then she points a gun at him. And you wonder, has she always just wanted to watch a man die? Has she always wanted to do this to Cynthia? Is she going to shoot this poor innocent guy? I dropped the gun being pointed at James from the edit because it just was too much for my character. And I thought it was a little out of character. Sure. But still the fascination with the morbid death of someone's loved one, she could witness this man die, was something that I thought was like a beautiful moment of just silence between character or main character and other character. So that was always in the shooting script.
Okay.
And I really like that.
Yeah. I mean, it was an interesting ending for sure, with, twists that you don't exactly expect. So it works. So, wrapping this up, what was your toughest scene? What was your toughest scene on the page? And what was your toughest scene as a director? They don't have to be the same scene. And how did you creatively rise to the challenge?
I think it was the scene where she talks about her past. I rewrote that scene a ton of times about her childhood.
The rooftop, right?
The rooftop scene, yeah. Visually, that was something I always knew how I wanted to shoot it. I always wanted to shoot it from a subway, in Brooklyn to a station to on top of a roof. Somehow found that location. But it was just like, how much do I give away? What do I say? And then there's it's a balance dealing, with actors, because what they see on the page, they're going to assume is going to wind up in the film, So you can't just say, I'm overwriting this, I'm going to peel it back in the edit, because it's also their character and you have to respect that. So that was a really difficult thing, because it had to be as close to Madison's character as possible without overwriting it. I knew it was necessary, and that was something I struggled with as a writer.
Okay. And what was your toughest scene as a director?
Luckily, honestly, the production was really challenging, just overall, because we had close to 120 scenes,
right.
18 days, and we're shooting all nights. For the most part, it's like 3 days. The production as a whole was challenging. I had rehearsed a lot with where I was going to put the camera. Mattia and I worked really, really well together, and we would adjust as we kind of like solved the blocking, because I like to let the actors have fun and just kind of work it out with the actors and bring the camera in, even though I know where I want to put the camera, and that can sometimes change. So I like giving myself the room to let things change. And I think like being on set is an inspirational moment, and we should, kind of all, director, camera, actors, everybody be part of this collaboration. I don't know.
All right. There doesn't have to be a tough scene. I mean, you could just let the logistics of the shoot itself.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I can answer that now. The prison day, the final scene of the movie. So we had rented these vintage K-35s, Cannons, right? And one of them was a rehoused bayonet lens, right? Which they rehoused it so it could fit on the red. And all I know is we were shooting this sequence, and it was on the 18 mil that we had rented, and the lens fell off the camera. The remote follow focus had accidentally unscrewed the lens from its housing.
Oh no.
And it started to, like, the first AC was looking at the follow focus, looking at the camera, and they started to see this like wiggle, right? And then I swear to God, dude, we're shooting a scene, and he dives across a prison floor and catches a lens as it falls from the camera before. This is $60,000 lens, something
right
like that. Catches it, and it lands in his hands, and we all kind of like sweat and take a break. But, it was storming outside, obviously. It had to be storming that day. And we had to be like at a really hard out inside of a real active prison. And then we lost an hour of our time. We had to like make up on what was always going to be the craziest, I think it was like a 10-page day. Plus, we were never going back there again. I mean,
right.
I was shooting Eddie's character out that day, Scotty Tovar, who's an amazing actor. So finding a lot of Madison's character in that day, also shooting the ending, having the lens break. We were not even scheduled to be in the prison that day. We were supposed to be shooting with this entire Chinatown sequence, but a storm in New York just decided to happen that day. So I had to call all the actors the morning of and say, you're not going there, you're going here. And luckily everybody was a trooper. Everybody stayed, and we were, wrapping out half of our gear as we were shooting the final scene. So that was one of the very challenging days. Yeah.
And of course, that's why we get film insurance, kids. In case that you didn't have one of the best ACs ever who could catch a falling lens, That's why film production insurance is very important. Well, so what's next? What are you working on next?
I have a documentary that I'm working on the life of Philippe Rousselot, who is the cinematographer from, Big Fish, River Runs Through It, Academy Award-winning, terrific cinematographer. So it's executive produced by Kim Basinger and Lynn Littman, and produced by Oren Siegel and Deborah Ferrantino and Autumn McIntosh, and we are going to be making that documentary soon. So that's
great.
That's up next. I want to celebrate his life. He's such a inspirational figure, and I was really
great cinematographer for sure.
Yeah, I was into his life. I was into his films like Diva and Cinema de Look Movement for a lot of my life. And then I've got this pretty cool drama crime thriller that I've written, so I want to get that made.
Okay, so you're just starting to write it?
Now I just finished writing it. Well, I mean, as finished as it can be.
Right.
But I'm ready to start getting the ball moving on that now.
That's great. Well, look, You've been very generous with your time. I can't wait to see what you do next. Matthew, thanks for coming down.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Matthew Berkowitz for being so generous with his time and chatting about his latest film, The Madness Inside Me. And folks, if you want to support independent cinema, seek out The Madness Inside Me. Go watch it somewhere. You could find it video on demand. You could find it the places that you usually rent movies. And, look, this podcast and my magazine, it's all about connecting audiences and filmmakers. And now is still a challenging time for independent films. So I hope you go check out The Madness Inside Me. And while you're surfing around online, I would be remiss if I didn't point you in the direction of Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And folks, now is as good as time as ever to become a subscriber. Our summer issue is still our main issue, but we're coming up on our fall issue in a couple of weeks here. And there's a lot of great content. We even put new articles in the magazine even after we publish, like, for instance, Paul Thomas Anderson interviewing director Martin Brest about making Beverly Hills Cop, and Midnight Run, which was a Q&A that was done at the Aero Theater at the American Cinematheque. So there's always plenty of interesting content to check out at backstory.net. And if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. And if you want to become a subscriber, you could use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all of these Zoomcasts go during the pandemic, support my passion project by becoming subscribers to Backstory Magazine. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to drop me a line, you can always reach me at backstoryletters@gmail.com. And I promise not to get back to you immediately. Don't worry. No, I will get back to you. It just takes a little time. You can always find me on social media on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I run both those accounts. In fact, those are the same two accounts on Instagram as well, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I have a Facebook fan page. I check it sometimes. You can check me out there too. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.